State officials from both parties in New Hampshire are ready to go to war with the Democratic National Committee over its election-related changes. This story is out of control, and it gives you a sense of just how far the DNC is willing to go in order to give their preferred candidate an upper hand in the general election. And so the DNC wants New Hampshire's primary to take place after South Carolina's. And lawmakers in New Hampshire absolutely reject the idea, and they're insisting to basically do as they usually do. They insist to hold their primary elections first. And things have gotten so heated that the DNC has now called New Hampshire's primary, literally, they said this, meaningless. They called it meaningless. And the New Hampshire Attorney General has even filed a cease and desist order against the DNC. That's how heated this is getting. So here's how the situation came to be. In late 2022, the White House had proposed a change to the presidential primary calendar. So let's put this graphic up. It'll show you what the changes would look like. So the normal order of state primaries go like this: first Iowa, second New Hampshire, third South Carolina. Well, the White House's proposal and what the DNC is trying to carry out is to have South Carolina go first, New Hampshire go second. And then you probably noticed that Iowa isn't even listed as third because Iowa would basically be jettisoned from the early voting states. Now, here's why the White House, and by extension, the DNC, claims they wanted to switch the order. And look, before I even read you the statement, let me just note, I find this statement unacceptable, okay? Because this isn't really what's motivating it, and I'll explain why in a moment. But even if this were the real reason, I just don't think this is a good reason to switch the order of the states. So the DNC swiftly codified Biden's wishes, saying they were necessary to give voters of color a greater voice in the process. Okay, let's pause. Listen, we live in a country that has an awful history when it comes to the treatment of people of color being able to exercise their ability to vote. The idea that you should now give any group an upper hand in the electoral process, I think is ridiculous. Every American who is of voting age and is an eligible voter should be treated the same. No one should get an advantage over anyone else. I don't care about race, don't care about gender, don't care about sexual identity or affiliation. I just think that this reasoning, even though this isn't the real motivation, is what leads to division in the country. And Democrats always lean to this, and they don't realize how toxic it ends up being for greater society. So they say the DNC swiftly codified Biden's wishes, saying they were necessary to give voters of color a greater voice in the process. Though many noted that Biden happened to win South Carolina in 2020 while he lost Iowa, he came fourth place in New Hampshire and fifth place that year. So the second half of that is really what's motivating the Biden White House, and by extension of that, the DNC, to try to change the order of the states. It's not really about giving people of color a greater voice in our elections. I mean, they always lean into identity politics as their excuse for doing all sorts of insidious things. In reality, this is about giving Biden needed momentum in the primary process. And honestly, that reasoning that they gave about people of color, I think was incredibly fishy. So here's some more details about the 2020 Democratic primary and like how they turned out, because I think that'll also kind of give you the context necessary to understand the real motivating factors behind Biden and the DNC. So for instance, in Iowa in 2020, Biden did not win that primary. So Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders were neck and neck. And Bernie ended up winning the popular vote, but Buttigieg was ultimately awarded 2 more delegates. That was a whole debacle. Go back, 4 years to watch our video content on that. Then you had New Hampshire, okay? So it was another close race, but it was a close race between Bernie and Buttigieg. Bernie got the most votes, but the 2 actually got an equal share of delegates. Klobuchar got 6 delegates in the state of New Hampshire, and was the last candidate to be awarded any. Biden was 5th in the popular vote in New Hampshire. So can you understand why Biden wouldn't want New Hampshire to be first in the primary elections. But South Carolina was a little different. And South Carolina is the state that Biden would like to be first in the primary elections. Biden easily won the state with nearly 50% of the vote. Bernie came in second place with almost 20% of the vote. And so again, what Biden wants to do is front load the states where he's likely to do well in the primary elections. But since New Hampshire didn't agree to this, well, Biden's not even gonna appear on New Hampshire's ballot. That's how insane this is. So look, with all of this in mind, it's easy to understand why New Hampshire officials did not buy the DNC's bogus identity politics excuse. New Hampshire Secretary of State, a Republican, set the primary's date for January 23rd, knowing it would be out of compliance with DNC rules. And the DNC declared the primary invalid and warned the state would lose its delegates to the Democratic National Convention. But New Hampshire's like, no, we will persist. And they've chosen to do so. They cited state law that requires New Hampshire to hold a primary at least a week before any other state. And so the DNC has continued to lash out against New Hampshire. Just last Friday, the DNC sent a stunning letter to the chairman of the New Hampshire Democratic Party. His name is Ray Buckley. And here's an excerpt of what they wrote. As you are aware, the Rules and Bylaws Committee deemed the New Hampshire Democratic Party's plan non-compliant on December 1st of 2023. The New Hampshire Democratic Party must take steps to educate the public that January 23rd is a non-binding presidential preference event and is meaningless. And the NH-DP and the presidential candidate should take all steps possible not to participate. This is the party that is running a candidate whose entire campaign platform is about saving democracy. Just let that sink in for a second. Okay. So again, the DNC told New Hampshire officials that they need to bury their own primary. And not only that, they also stated that if they do not move the date of the primary to what the DNC prefers, the state's delegates will not be awarded to New Hampshire. But the DNC is also failing to intimidate them, and I love to see this, okay? This conflict has united both parties in the state of New Hampshire, with Republican Secretary of State and the Attorney General coming to Buckley's defense. Just yesterday, the State Attorney General's office also filed a cease and desist order directed at the DNC. The office also wrote in a letter to the organization accusing it of illegal voter suppression. Again, this is the party that claims they're trying to protect democracy, telling any person qualified to register to vote or vote in New Hampshire that the January 23rd, 2024 New Hampshire Democratic presidential primary election is meaningless, constitutes an attempt to prevent or deter New Hampshire voters from participating in the primary. And look, as we know, the Democratic Party doesn't want to allow primaries to even happen. Right? They've got their 81-year-old incumbent president, and they feel that he is entitled to winning the nomination. And they know how deeply unpopular Biden is. Biden is incredibly low in approval ratings. And so in order to prevent any possibility of Biden losing the primary elections, they're just not allowing primaries to take place. No primary debates on the Democratic side. The state of Florida, along with a few other states, have decided we're just not gonna hold primaries. It's insane, absolutely insane. So what happens now? Well, Biden has refrained from putting his name on this whole New Hampshire primary debacle. And according to Politico, Biden allies are working on a write-in campaign for him in the state, because all of these chaotic moves and all of this conflict, again, has led to a situation in which Biden won't even appear on the ballot. Meanwhile, New Hampshire officials are showing no sign of moving their primary. They do intend to allow this primary to take place on January 23rd. And it remains to be seen what the DNC will do in response to that. But even if the DNC does allow the delegates to be awarded, none of them will be allowed to go to presidential candidate Cenk Uygur because the state has completely excluded him from the ballot. And so we'll see how this all plays out. I think that these moves that the DNC tends to engage in during primary elections does not speak well of the Democratic Party. And I think it is particularly toxic for the Democratic Party when they are trying to run Joe Biden, again, a candidate who is going to base almost the entirety of his reelection campaign on Trump bad, democracy important, we must protect democracy. I don't know if Trump is going to be savvy enough to see what's currently transpiring with the DNC and use that to his advantage to basically squash the allegations of Trump being anti-democratic. But he'd be smart if he did use this to his advantage, and to know that the Democratic candidate here, Joe Biden, has that vulnerability is yet another cause for concern. He's got low approval ratings, okay? He's got this vulnerability with the DNC basically carrying out his wishes and trying to screw around with the primaries in order to give him an advantage. You've got the ongoing migrant crisis, which we're gonna talk about a little later. The fact that Republicans don't wanna do anything about it because they know that it is in fact hurting Joe Biden and his chances of getting reelected. I mean, the list goes on. And as Democrats like to celebrate the fact that inflation has slowed down a bit, remember, inflation has only slowed down a bit recently. Inflation increased the baseline cost of goods that we need on a daily basis. That didn't go down, and that very likely will never go down. It's just that inflation in recent months has slowed down from 7%, 9% to 3%. But again, that baseline is up there, and it's still crushing a lot of Americans, and a lot of Americans feel frustrated about their economic situation. All of these things really do combine to make Biden a vulnerable candidate, but he's being forced upon American voters, Democratic voters in particular, obviously. And if Trump really is a threat to America and our democratic process, well, the DNC and Joe Biden have a funny way of showing it.
Hey, thanks for watching that video. We really appreciate it, guys. And we appreciate it if you become members, because that allows us to be independent, honest, progressive, all the things that you don't get from corporate media. And all of that is because of you guys. Hit the join button below and become one of us, become a Young Turk.